Good evening and welcome to the fourth supper club for this year's series on the 7 deadly sins. We are continuing that series. We've accomplished the sin of greed, the sin of gluttony, and the sin of envy and jealousy. So this month we're doing the sin of sloth because it's January, it's post-holiday. It seemed a right time to address the post-holiday, maybe doldrums.
We're all just laying around.
Doldrums, something.
Right, yeah.
Just a reminder that when we talk about the 7 deadly sins, when we talk about sin, we mean sin as a separation from God or self or others, not about our moral behavior necessarily.
Right. That's for sure, yeah. And sloth often gets collapsed into just laying around and not being productive, right? We think of a sloth, the animal of sloth,
right,
just lays around. And the thing we want to keep in mind here is that being unproductive is actually something God is quite fond of. It's called Sabbath time. It's rest time. We need times where we're not always busy, always on the go. So that's not what we're talking about here. So we're going to talk about 3 different layers of sloth. And the first is laziness, which is not just laying around. This is, think of laziness as not fulfilling the commitments that you've made to other people, the friends and family, the relationships that we're in, right? It's important that we're a part of doing our part. So we had talked about the early monastic community. So if you had a monastic community in there, everybody's got a role, everybody's got a piece, and if someone is slothful, is lazy, and doesn't do their part, then the whole community suffers from that, right? They all have their piece of that.
So they're interdependent. They count on each other to play their roles, and if one doesn't play his or her role, then this community suffers. Right.
And so an easy example is, I think teenagers actually sometimes suffer from, we say they're lazy. I think some of that is true because they're still learning to take full responsibility in the family community, right? They, as little children, everything got done for them, and we're teaching them to take full responsibility. Hopefully. and along the way, when my 11-year-old says, well, why do I have to unload the dishwasher? And I go, what part of this do you not understand? That this is part of being that feels lazy, and I think that is in the classic sense of sloth. This is a form of sloth at that basic level, to me. Disagree?
Okay.
Yeah, all right. We'll talk off camera.
Well, off camera we'll talk about that. A second level of sloth is turning down opportunities for service. Right. So there are plenty of opportunities for service out there. I mean, anyone can get involved with the Habitat for Humanity program or those kind of things. And I think it's easy to pull out of our sense of obligation to the larger common good and miss opportunities, or we don't take opportunities to put ourselves out there to sometimes really engage.
And we can get so busy with our little world. We set up a lifestyle that then requires us to spend all of our time and resources on ourselves. And as Christians, to think of stepping outside of just that small circle of commitment and influence is important for us.
Would you even say it's a duty for us as Christians?
Yeah, I think so. It's I think from a secular point of view, you can think of our lives that the goal of life is kind of a self-preservation. But as Christians, I think we do hold ourselves to a higher or a different moral kind of obligation to the stranger, to those who are hurting, to put ourselves in places
giving our
of
lives
suffering.
away, giving ourselves away.
Yeah. So it's another layer to this. Acedia, do you want to talk about? I don't know if we want to bring that in, but
I guess it's a good place to bring it in. There's an old, probably from the time of the Desert Fathers and the monastic communities, a labeling of this condition, almost a precursor to psychological studies of the human condition, called acedia. And acedia meaning a restlessness, like a chronic restlessness or a boredom or an apathy about life.
Yeah.
And that they recognize this in brothers in the community, which almost sounds like a depression or at least a malaise or melancholy, and that it plays it's a precursor to sloth, that maybe the feeling gives way to the lack of engagement, a lack of engagement in the world and in our lives and in relationships.
Interesting that we've lost the word in our culture, and yet we have a lot of people who are feeling disconnected and disengaged with the world.
Yeah.
Medication to help us with that is on the rise. It's a serious issue for us as a culture.
As a culture.
And we don't have a word for this.
Kind of a spiritual illness, I use that lightly, but a spiritual condition that says what's worth engaging in the world. And if we don't offer, back to the kids, if we don't offer our kids things that seem meaningfully worthy to be engaged in, there's a restlessness there. There's a desire to hook in somewhere, I think.
Yeah, somewhere, and it's our job to help them.
Right, and help each other.
Yeah. The third level that we talked about doing or thinking about sloth is the sense in which we're we play too small. Self-negating is the longer word for this, where we don't bring all of our gifts and all of who we are to the community around us. And sometimes we put that on ourselves. Maybe we don't want the risk of being rejected or whatever it might be. Other times it seems like society sends us messages to, don't get too big for your britches. Don't.
Which has been an issue for women.
Especially
it's not
for
the sin of pride, but the sin of playing down what we have to offer.
But if we think of ourselves as instruments of God's care, and that God has given us special gifts to give the world, to play small, is this really a deep level of sloth where we don't, we're not all that we can be.
No. So we're not offering up what God has given us to the larger community. We're holding back. Yeah. And it's another form of duty that if you've been gifted with gifts in preaching and teaching and writing, that you're called up to use those gifts.
And to take the risk of doing that, right? Yeah. That's really true. The sin of sloth is maybe of the 7 deadly sins the most explicitly religious of them.
Say more about that.
There's a sense of, with the other ones, that they're like character flaws. Not much you can do about those things in some ways. But sloth is about our relationship. If God's given us these gifts to be all that we can be, and that the world needs those gifts, to resist that or to say no to those opportunities to serve, is a abdication of our divine kind of obligation in the world. That we're in the world in this way as religious people.
Right.
So that feels important to think about this a little more about as a reflection of our relationship with God this time.
Yeah.
More than some of the others.
Yeah. Antidotes?
Antidotes.
Antidotes to slothfulness. I think we have to be really honest with ourselves and really look closely. St. Ignatius has the practice of the examen, and in some ways I think this plays in. The practice of the examen is to look at your daily life really carefully. What did I do today? And then to be honest about, was my day really centered around me, my family, perhaps just your family, which is okay at times, but are we doling out our attention and our gifts and our energy to those who are suffering? And I think there's a really important part of our spiritual lives where we have to engage with people who are in pain and suffering. It gets us out of ourselves, and there's a healthiness about that to keep perspective about our own concerns.
And in fact, so a simple way is that to think about is that when we do step out into the world in this way and serve others, that it's self-gratifying. And the funny thing is that it turns out to not just be this painful suffering, being with those who are hurting or just giving your gifts in the world, usually
you get something out of it,
yeah,
right?
you feel
It gives
better
back.
as a result of it. And also to think about in terms of antidotes, to maybe have the idea of balancing things that are just pleasurable for us, enjoying things, and being of
Yeah,
service. That
right.
we want some balance in our life. That we have.
It's not one or the other.
Life's not all just about
Right.
the struggle to save the world, and it's not all just about pleasure, your own pleasure. So thinking about those two, having some balance in your life, seems important.
That's good.
Yeah. Questions?
Questions. What are our questions?
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, because I'm not sure.
I've got it.
Okay.
Got this. We were
Looking.
thinking actually that you would look at all three of these layers that
Yes.
we've talked about. So take the first one, laziness, which remember is not just being unproductive. Right? But it's about not meeting the obligations of the core community that you're around, your
Right.
family, your friends.
Not playing your part.
Not playing your part, exactly. So, spend some time. Think about that. Talk together about where do you get caught just being lazy, where I go, oh, yeah, I really should be doing
So
more.
who's going to help clean up the dishes at the end of this dinner?
Exactly. Good question. So that's a question that you
Yes.
can wrestle with
The
laziness.
host will ask that.
Right. The second layer then is the whole piece about being of service in the world.
Not taking opportunities, or
Exactly.
do you take opportunities to be involved
Yeah.
beyond your own life? I mean, simply, what are you involved in giving back
That's
to
right.
others
That's
in
right.
your life that
And
you
if
can
you-
say that's for others?
And if you don't, or if you're having trouble, what's in your way? Talk to me, be honest about,
Yeah.
particularly I think a lot of us get so busy in our own worlds.
Yeah.
Seems like some rich
Yeah.
food for thought to self-reflect on where the hang-ups are for you with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, playing small.
Playing small.
So that's really about, again, looking at yourself and are you really bringing all the gifts that you have to the world? Why not, if you're not?
Yeah, where are the rubs in your life where you feel like I
Yeah.
could be or should be
Mhm.
using that gift or talent
Yeah.
or
And are you getting
call.
messages from friends and family or the culture not to do that? Or is this
Yeah.
really about your own fears of rejection or failure in bringing those gifts?
Mhm.
Um,
So when the nominating committee calls at church for you to step up and
Good
serve, nice transition, don't be a
don't
sloth.
be slothful.
Hey,
Right.
that's good.
Yeah.
Have a good
See
time.
ya. Good night.